If your father hadn't gotten involved with that woman, I wouldn't have to be stuck with you two. The wind slipped through the chicken coop in silence. The wooden cane sliced through the air like a curse. Skin split. Ellie's back bent like dry. Cane, she didn't cry, not a single tear. She just clung tighter to Shadow's fur, the old canine dog lying beside her, eyes fixed on the woman who delivered the blow. He didn't bark. Some dogs don't. They just remember. Ellie was 6 years old. And already, she knew, there are women who don't know how to love, and houses where you learn not to breathe too loud. Willow Hollow had a name that sounded like a promise, but on that dry April morning, there was nothing promising in the air. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the scent of warm soil and chicken feathers drifted like an old memory. The countryside was waking up slowly, roosters crowing out of sync, dry leaves rolling across the ground as if searching for something lost. Thomas, boots worn and hat tilted, crossed the yard carrying a sack of corn on his shoulders. His back, still strong, creaked with a sound barely audible. The farm was his legacy, his burden, and his only shield against loneliness since Lucia, his lifelong wife, had closed her eyes forever in that same house 2 winters ago. Ellie followed silently, 6 years old. A frayed cotton dress hair, tied back in a crooked braid, bare feet still caked with dust from days before. At her side walked Shadow, the old canine Thomas had adopted after the police retired him in Guadalajara. No one knew his exact age, but he walked with the dignity of someone who had already seen more than he deserved. "Come on, Kami, the hens don't wait," Thomas said with a voice that sounded tired even when it tried to be cheerful. She didn't answer, just looked down and kept walking, hands deep in the apron pockets. It wasn't fear. It was something else, a hollow space that forms when words no longer explain the pain. From the porch, Lorraine watched them. Her figure was slim, almost elegant, but her gaze was dry. There was no softness in her blink. She wore a white linen dress, too clean for a morning on the farm, and held a coffee cup she didn't seem to drink, just used as an excuse to stay distant. "The girl's barefoot again?" she said quietly, but loud enough for Ellie to hear. "You're raising savages, Julian." Thomas pressed his lips together. Didn't respond. He simply adjusted the sack on his shoulder and walked toward the coop. Shadow let out a low growl, almost inaudible, never taking his eyes off Lorraine. The woman turned sharply and went back inside. Ben Whitaker, Ellie's older brother, was already in the chicken coop. 8 years old, but the dark circles under his eyes made him look older. He was counting eggs, moving quickly and silently. When he saw Ellie, he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dad says if we finish early, we can go to the river later," he whispered, as if speaking any louder might break something. She nodded, lowering her head so he wouldn't see the small bruises on her neck, still fresh. Shadow, as if he understood, lay down in front of the coop door, his body firm, like a sentinel. In the distance, the sound of Chuck Danner's truck engine broke the silence. The neighbor. Lorraine stepped out of the house just then, hair done, lips painted. Too early to be so ready. Thomas frowned at the scene. He knew, not everything, but enough. He wasn't blind, just tired. "That guy again?" he muttered, mostly to himself. "Chuck Danner's just here to help with the posts," Lorraine replied without looking at him. "Not everyone runs from problems like you." The words hit like a rusty nail. Thomas said nothing, kept working. Silence was his armor. Shadow barked just once, short and sharp, as if he were answering for him. That night, Ellie refused to eat. She sat on the floor next to Shadow, resting her head on his back. The dog didn't move. He only breathed deeply, with that quiet patience of those who've been close to hell and returned whole. "Sometimes I dream of Mom," she murmured. "In the dream, she sings to me. And you're there too. But you don't bark. You're just there." Shadow flicked his ear barely, and she took it as a response. From the kitchen window, Lorraine watched them. And for a second, just a second, her expression changed. Not into sweetness, but into irritation. As if the bond between the girl and the dog were a personal offense. "That dog should sleep outside," she said under her breath. "Too much. Closeness isn't good." Thomas, who had heard her, replied without taking his eyes off the stove. "Sometimes the only warmth one has comes from someone who can't speak." And then it was Lorraine who fell silent. That night, the moon seemed lower than usual. The wind blew with the scent of dust and memory. On the porch, Shadow stood guard at the children's bedroom door. He didn't sleep. He didn't dream. He just waited. And in that waiting, something began to heal something that didn't yet have a name. Morning in Willow Hollow smelled like boiled corn and dry fear. Ellie woke to light filtering through the cracks in the blinds. Outside, the roosters were still arguing about the order of dawn. Inside, the air held that thickness you only recognize. With your skin, as if the day already knew something was going to hurt. Shadow was there, lying next to the bed, his snout resting on his front paws. The old canine dog didn't sleep, not fully. One of his eyes, the left, the one that still saw, clearly remained alert to footsteps on the wooden floor. To breathing that didn't sound right. To silences cut all wrong. Ben Whitaker was already in the kitchen, trying to reach the sack of corn to feed the chickens. Ellie came down barefoot, braid half undone, knees covered in scrapes from yesterday. Shadow followed her, one step behind, like a shadow trained to protect what's fragile. Lorraine was waiting, spatula in hand. She wasn't cooking. She just held it, like someone holding a threat wrapped in foil. Her robe was open to the knee. The cigarette dangled loosely from her lower lip. "Late again," she said without looking at them. "You think the chickens feed themselves?" Ben Whitaker bowed his head. Ellie clenched her jaw. No one answered. "And what's with that useless dog following you like a ghost?" Lorraine spat the word dog as if it burned her tongue. Should have put him down years ago. Shadow didn't move. He didn't growl. Didn't even lift his head. But his ears tensed. Ellie whispered, "He understands." "What did you say, brat?" "That he understands when someone doesn't love anyone." Silence dropped like a stone. Ben Whitaker let the sack fall. Then Lorraine raised the spatula. It wasn't a direct blow. It was one of those meant to leave a mark, not kill. The wood struck Ben Whitaker's back with a dull thud. Ellie screamed, but not loud, like her throat wouldn't fully open. Lorraine turned toward her. Ellie stepped back. Shadow stepped in between them. Lorraine lowered her arm. "Don't provoke me, animal. You're nothing but a slab of meat with legs," she snapped, and spat near the dog's snout. Shadow didn't back away. He stood firm. Ellie looked at him like someone looking at a wall that would never break. Then, slowly, she bowed her head and ran trembling fingers over his graying back. "Thank you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Lorraine spun on her heel and left. The still-burning cigarette left a rancid smell in the air. Ellie didn't cry. She just stayed there, hand on Shadow, feeling the rise and fall of the animal's chest. A rhythm that wasn't human, a rhythm that didn't lie. From the floor, Ben Whitaker murmured, "Do you remember when Dad said she came with the spring?" Ellie looked at him. There was no spring in her eyes. It wasn't spring, Ben Whitaker. It was smoke. The day went on like the days when no one wants to see. Hens clucking, neighbors waving from afar, Lorraine singing sad boleros that didn't belong to her. But something had already broken. That night, Ellie didn't eat dinner. Lorraine didn't notice either. Ben Whitaker fell asleep beside the dog, his head resting on its side. Ellie sat by the window. Outside, the fireflies seemed to be trying to write something in light, something she couldn't read. Shadow got up at dawn. Ellie followed him with her eyes. He walked to the door, stopped, and looked back at her. As if he knew, the girl came down without making a sound. She crossed the kitchen, avoided the loose floorboard that creaked, and slipped out to the backyard. The chicken coop was calm, but on the ground, under a loose stone, there was a folded piece of paper. She recognized it. It was one of the letters her biological mother had written before she died. She had never read it. Thomas had kept it. But now it was there. Ellie unfolded it with shadowed hands. "Ellie, my little star, if you're ever afraid, look for the dog. He'll know. They always know." The ink had bled, but the words were still alive. Shadow sat beside her. He didn't look at her. He just stayed, the way only those who truly love know how to stay. Ellie folded the letter and placed it under her pillow. That night, she dreamed of the sound of a muffled howl. A howl that didn't come out, afraid of being heard. But she also dreamed that someone, one day, would open the door from the inside. And Shadow would be there, waiting, always waiting. The first time Lorraine said, "You're just in the way," Ellie didn't understand. She was 6 years old. Her bare feet covered in dirt from the yard, a crooked braid falling over her shoulder, and a heart too new to know that some words aren't mistakes, they're poison. "Don't move," Lorraine snapped, walnut cane in hand. "I told you, the roosters eat at dawn, not when you feel like it." Ben Whitaker tried to step in. He was only 8, but you could see the fury in his clenched jaw. He took a step toward his sister. "It was my fault. I distracted her," he said. "Oh, really? Then both of you." The blow made no sound. Only a pause, as if the whole world held its breath. Ellie didn't scream. She never did. She had learned that screaming only dragged the scene out longer. She closed her eyes. She imagined the fields when everything was asleep. The soft light of dawn, the scent of corn, Shadow's breathing. The dog was there again, as always, lying at the edge of the yard, ears alert, eyes locked on the cane. He didn't growl, he just watched. Shadow had been trained not to act without command. But ever since Julian, the children's father, left, Shadow responded to no one, only to them. Ellie used to say the dog knew more than all the adults in town, and sometimes it really seemed that way. Lorraine raised the cane again. "If you look at me like that, brat, I swear this time you won't stop until you bleed." And Ellie lowered her eyes. She felt the sting mixing with shame, but she didn't cry. Ben Whitaker said nothing more. He just walked to the barn, fists clenched. Shadow followed him, silent, tail low, back taut. That night, Ellie wrote in the notebook hidden under her mattress. She always did that when Lorraine hit her or said those things that hurt more than the stick. "Today I didn't cry. Shadow watched me the whole time. I think if I cry, he gets sad, and I don't want him to break too." 2 days later, Lorraine locked Ben Whitaker in the tool shed. It was a windowless room with a cement floor and the smell of old oil. She accused him of hiding eggs, as if a child could possibly understand the business of stealing. "You're going to learn not to act smart here. Your father isn't coming to save you," she said before locking the door with a double bolt. Ellie heard her brother's screams through the walls. Dusk was falling. The yard filled with long shadows, and the cold wind swept down from the mountains. She looked for Shadow. The dog wasn't in his usual spot. She found him scratching at the tool shed door, nose pressed against the bottom crack, front paws digging at the ground like he knew exactly what to do to save him. "Is Ben Whitaker in there?" Ellie whispered. Shadow whined, low and soft. "How do we open it? I don't have the keys. Lorraine keeps them in her apron." Shadow looked at her. Ellie felt like he wasn't just looking, he was speaking. Wordlessly, she ran to the kitchen and searched for the spare key her father used to hide under the sack of feed. She found it with trembling hands, ran back, slipped the key in. Opened the door. Ben Whitaker collapsed onto the ground, face pale, lips cracked and dry. Shadow approached and licked him gently behind the ear. Ellie had never seen her brother shake like that. That night, the three of them slept together under the big dining table. Ellie wrapped her arms around Shadow's neck. Ben Whitaker breathed. Slowly, Ellie wrote again, "Today Shadow saved my brother. He didn't bark, he didn't bite. He just let us. He's broken too. But he doesn't give up." A week later, Lorraine received a letter. It was from the neighboring town. It said Grace Hamilton, the other woman, from Julian's past, had returned to Willow Hollow. She'd been seen at the station with a suitcase and flowers on her dress. Lorraine tore the letter up and hurled her coffee cup against the wall. "That witch won't take what cost me everything. You hear me?" she said, glaring at the children, with a fury so thick it was almost a scent in the air. Ben Whitaker took Ellie by the hand. They went down to the yard and sat beside Shadow. The dog rested his head on the girl's legs. "Do you think Papa will come back?" she asked. Ben Whitaker didn't answer. He just stroked Shadow's fur. "He's still looking after us, you know. With him, it hurts less." Ellie looked up at the sky. The moon was whole. The wind carried the smell of firewood from other houses. Shadow sighed, as if he too remembered another life, another home, another pain. That night, for the first time, Ellie dreamed of her mother. They were in the countryside. Grace Hamilton was braiding her hair. Ben Whitaker laughed, flying a kite. And Shadow, young again, ran among the sunflowers. She woke with wet eyes. But she was smiling. Because even if the real world stayed twisted in her dreams, Shadow was there too. And that changed everything. Chuck Danner arrived just before sunset, when the sky over Willow Hollow turned to copper and the roosters fell silent, as if honoring the hush between light and shadow. Lorraine waited in the kitchen, hands buried in nameless dough, lips pursed, like she was chewing on old bitterness. A vintage bolero played faintly on the radio, barely audible. The air smelled of stale grease, scorched corn, and something sour, resentment. Chuck Danner didn't greet her. He just dropped his hat on the chair and stood there, looking at her the way one looks at an animal they've hunted before. "Did he sign it?" he asked. "Not yet. But he will," she answered without looking up. "That man thinks he can leave me with the scraps. Give everything to those brats and the other one. The other one." That's how she referred to Grace Hamilton, with a mix of undigested jealousy and dried-up hate. No one knew for sure what had existed between Julian and Grace Hamilton. But Lorraine had felt the threat the moment she first heard her name. The threat wasn't the woman. It was what she represented: tenderness, honesty, things Lorraine had never needed to offer. Shadow moved beneath the table. He was always there, like a literal shadow, a silent witness to human misery. He approached Ellie, who was playing alone on the floor, drawing in the dirt of the inner courtyard with a stick. When she felt the warm breath on her neck, she turned and pressed her forehead against the dog's snout. "You understand without asking," she whispered. "You don't hurt me." Shadow lay down beside her, his body curled close to hers, as if his presence alone could hold off the cold of the night or the blade of disdain. Lorraine dug her fingers into the dough and kneaded it with rage. "Sometimes I dream the house burns down and I'm the only one who walks out unharmed. Everything else disappears. It all starts over." Chuck Danner laughed, low, with a voice full of smoke and thorns. "You don't want to start over. You want them to pay." She looked up. "And you're not here just for me. You've always wanted this place. You've had your eye on it since the day you arrived, like a starving dog staring at a piece of meat." Chuck Danner stepped closer, slowly. He touched her chin, lifting her face. "I don't want the place. I want to stop being nobody. I want what was denied to me, and you. You're the shortest path." Shadow stood up. His body tightened like an old rope. He narrowed his eyes. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just watched. Because old dogs don't make noise when they smell danger. They wait. They remember. Ellie, still on the ground, drew a house. Then a small figure. Then another. Then shadow. But when she tried to draw Lorraine, her hand froze. She looked at her dog and said in a soft voice, "She doesn't fit here. Because you protect, and she breaks." Later, when dinner was served, Lorraine ordered the children to eat alone in the back kitchen. She and Chuck Danner stayed in the dining room, drinking mezcal like they were toasting to a crime not yet committed. The signature will come. He's weak. He's confused. And he trusts, she said. And if he doesn't? Chuck Danner asked, biting into a tortilla without appetite. Then we destroy him. We drag him through the mud. Take his children, his honor, and leave him empty. Chuck Danner laughed. You should have been born a man. You've got the soul for it. No, I've got the soul to survive. That's not the same. Ellie ate in silence next to Ben Whitaker. The boy barely touched his food. His ribs showed through his shirt. She broke her tortilla in half and gave him a piece. Papa will come back, Ben Whitaker said without conviction. Yes, Ellie answered, but he won't recognize us. We'll be different when he returns. Shadow watched them from the corner. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He just existed. That night, Lorraine stepped into the courtyard. The sky was clear. The stars looked down, more judging than comforting. Chuck Danner followed and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. If this goes well, you and I will have everything. If this goes well, she corrected him, I'll have peace. Shadow followed from a distance. Not out of instinct, but out of loyalty to something deeper than flesh, the soul. And at that moment, as the moon touched the rooftops, the old K9 lifted his head and let out a faint whine, so soft only Ellie heard it. The girl got out of her little bed, walked barefoot to the dog, and sat beside him. Don't go, she said. Don't leave me, she added, even softer. Shadow licked her fingers. And in that silent gesture, in that soundless caress, was more promise than in all the words of adults who had ever sworn to protect her. Lorraine and Chuck Danner returned to the house, laughing, as if the world belonged to them, as if other people's pain didn't exist. But Ellie, her head resting on her dog's flank, looked toward the horizon, not with anger, not with fear, with something else, with hope. Because even in the thickest darkness, there are eyes that do not sleep, and hearts that do not forget. The day Thomas packed his old leather suitcase, Willow Hollow grew grayer. Not because of the clouds, but because the earth itself seemed to stop breathing beneath his worn-out boots. He didn't say goodbye. He just stroked Shadow's back. The dog lifted his head and tilted his ears with an understanding older than language. Ben Whitaker watched from the doorway, his knuckles white from gripping the wooden frame too tightly. Ellie sat on the floor, legs crossed, eyes locked on the ground like she was searching for a root to anchor her. I'll be back soon, Julian said, his voice falling apart. But the children didn't answer, because they knew adults sometimes make promises the way people pray, not knowing if anyone is listening. If anything happens, follow Shadow. He knows where the light is. It was the last thing he said before climbing into the truck. Lorraine wandered through the house like the air belonged to her. Chuck Danner had started staying the nights, reeking of cheap cigarettes and mechanic sweat. He had taken the guest room without asking. Lorraine said nothing. She didn't need to pretend anymore. See how easy it is, love? He whispered one night, pouring himself a drink from the whiskey Julian had saved to celebrate his children's inheritance. That old fool left on his own. Now it's just a matter of time. Ellie and Ben Whitaker still have their names on the papers, Lorraine said, painting her nails a deep wine red. But that can be erased, like everything useless. Ben Whitaker listened from the hallway, pressing Shadow against his side. The dog didn't growl. He just breathed deeply, as if he could absorb fear and turn it into loyalty. The violence grew more subtle, more ordinary. Lorraine no longer struck with anger, but with routine, like watering plants, like washing dishes. "Get up, Ellie. This isn't an orphanage. Ben Whitaker, if you feed those chickens late again, you'll sleep with them." Shadow stood in the way when he could, nudging with his snout, barking low whenever Lorraine raised her voice. Once, he stepped in when she tried to drag Ben Whitaker by the arm. She looked at him with disgust. An old dog protecting trash. How sweet. But she never raised her hand again in front of Shadow, not out of fear, out of pride. The day Ben Whitaker almost died, it was Shadow who saved him. Chuck Danner had left the freezer door in the barn open, by accident, after threatening Ben Whitaker for forgetting to shut the chicken coop. Ellie searched for hours, screaming, running, digging through tall grass. No one helped her. Lorraine said she was overreacting. He probably ran off to play. If he doesn't come back, it's better for everyone. Shadow didn't search. He tracked like a soldier. He followed the scent of sweat and fear straight to the barn. He howled once, a hollow, deep cry, as if calling to something older than God. Ellie came running. She forced the door open. Ben Whitaker was inside, stiff, lips purple, but eyes open. In his hand, a piece of Shadow's collar clenched tight between his fingers. They didn't speak that night, but Ellie held Shadow for hours, as if afraid. Life itself might slip away in a breath. Thomas came back 2 days later. No one expected him. The dust on his coat smelled of highway and silence. He walked in without knocking. The first thing he saw was Chuck Danner sitting in his chair, reading his newspaper. "What are you doing here?" Julian asked, his voice dry. Chuck Danner didn't answer, just smiled and poured himself coffee. Ellie appeared behind him, eyes swollen. Ben Whitaker stood in the kitchen, trembling. Shadow, lying between them, lifted his head. "Where's Lorraine?" Julian asked. "She left. Probably off spending your money." That's when Ellie stepped forward. She held a notebook in her hand, a red one, stained with dirt and ink. She handed it to her father without a word. Julian read it in the living room. Every page was a knife. Dates, drawings, simple words written in a child's hand. Today. Ben Whitaker cried, but didn't scream. Shadow stood in front of me. Lorraine kicked him. He said Mom wouldn't love me even if I came back. Shadow sat in front of Julian in silence, as if asking for forgiveness for not having barked louder. Julian stroked his head with trembling fingers. For the first time in a long while, he cried, not for the betrayal, not for the loss, but for having been absent when he was needed most. "I knew it," he whispered. "Deep down I always knew." Shadow laid his head on Julian's knee. That night, Julian didn't sleep. He spoke with Carol Lee, the teacher, with Grace Hamilton, who had quietly returned to the village. He showed them the notebook. He asked for help, not to punish, to protect. "My children don't need revenge," he said. "They need to believe in someone again." The next morning, Lorraine returned. Well, what a surprise. "The martyr's back." Julian didn't respond. He simply said, "You're leaving today, or I'll throw you out myself." "And who's going to believe you, Julian? You or two brats full of imaginary scars?" That's when Ben Whitaker spoke. His voice was weak, but steady. "They're not imaginary." He lifted his shirt. The marks were there. Not all of them visible. Ellie stepped forward and placed the notebook on the table. "I wrote it all down." Lorraine turned pale. She looked around for Chuck Danner, but he was already gone. Shadow growled. Not fierce, not violent. Like someone singing a goodbye. Lorraine left without looking back. That afternoon, Ben Whitaker sat beside his father under the orange tree. "Why didn't we scream sooner, Dad?" Julian looked to the horizon. then at Shadow, sleeping at his feet. Because sometimes, son, pain makes us mute, but there's always someone who listens, even if they walk on 4 legs. Ben Whitaker smiled for the first time in weeks. Ellie arrived with a blanket and sat on Shadow's other side. No one said a word. And in that silence, the healing began. The light of dawn had barely touched the chicken coop when Ellie got up. She moved, silently, like every morning before Lorraine woke. Barefoot, she walked across the dirt floor, carrying the bucket of corn in both hands. Her knuckles were split open, but she said nothing. In the corner, Shadow was already waiting for her. Still, eyes fixed on the back door of the house. He was always there. That morning, the air smelled different, as if the land itself knew something was about to break. Ben Whitaker hadn't come down for breakfast. No one had seen him since last night, when Lorraine screamed at him for forgetting to lock the pen. Ellie lowered her gaze. She had learned not to ask questions. Questions brought beatings. In the kitchen, Lorraine poured coffee with cruel slowness. Chuck Danner sat there like a king who didn't deserve his throne. His smile crooked, his eyes cold. "Your little brother sleeps in hell tonight," Lorraine said, sipping her coffee. "And if you say a single word, you'll join him." Ellie clenched her teeth. She didn't cry. Not in front of them. Not in that house where tears were a luxury paid for in blood. Shadow let out a low growl. Lorraine looked at him with disdain. "That dog should be dead," she muttered. "Just like everything your father left behind." Ellie lowered her head and stepped into the yard. The sun was already warming the stones, but she didn't feel the heat. Her heart was cold. Her brother was still missing. And inside her, something was beginning to break. It was Shadow who led the way. With slow but determined steps, the dog walked away from the chicken coop and began barking toward the old storage shed. Ellie followed, confused. The door was locked with a padlock, but Shadow scratched the wood in desperation. Ellie pressed her ear to the door. Silence. Then she heard the whisper. Very faint. A moan. A ragged breath. "Ben Whitaker?" Nothing. Then, a soft thud, as if someone on the other side had gathered the last of their strength just to say, "I'm here." The girl ran back to the house. She searched the nails on the back door frame. She knew where Lorraine hid the keys. She had seen it once by accident. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hold the ring of metal. She ran again, back to the shed. With trembling hands, she opened the padlock. The air escaped like a breath from a grave. Ben Whitaker was curled up in a corner, skin ice cold, lips purple. Shadow entered first, lay beside him, and licked him, gently, as if tending a sacred wound. Ellie knelt beside her brother. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I didn't know." "Forgive me." Ben Whitaker couldn't speak. He only looked at her. And in his eyes there was something no child should carry, the knowledge of abandonment. Shadow never left his side. Not for a second. When Lorraine found them there with the door open and the 2 children clinging to the dog, she didn't scream. She didn't say a word. She just looked at them as if they no longer belonged to her. "You're just like your mother," Lorraine spat, eyes full of poison. "So weak, so useless. You should have died in childbirth." It was Shadow who stepped between them. He stood between Lorraine and the children. His aged body seemed larger in that moment. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply looked at her, steady, as if he remembered everything. As if at last he knew the moment to protect had arrived. Lorraine stepped back, and Ellie felt for the first time that silence could be a shield. That night, Ellie didn't sleep. She sat beside Ben Whitaker, who was breathing more calmly now. He had a fever, but no longer delirious. Shadow slept at the foot of the bed, his head between his paws, one ear tuned to every sound. Ellie pulled Out her notebook, the one she hid under the floorboards, and wrote, "Ben Whitaker almost died. So did I, but today, for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Because there was a dog who showed me that some silences can save. And some looks scream. Louder than fists." She closed the notebook, kissed her brother's forehead, and before turning off the light, she walked over to Shadow, stroked his neck. "Thank you, old man. You're my hero." Even if no one else knows it, the dog didn't respond. He only closed his eyes, as if that touch was the balm he had waited for all these years. Outside, in the darkness of the countryside, the wind rustled the lemon trees. No one cried, no one screamed, but something in the soul of that house had begun to heal. In Willow Hollow, the afternoon wind carried the scent of damp earth and fallen lemons. It was an old air, full of memories that didn't ask permission to return. Grace Hamilton stepped off the bus without looking back. She wore pale linen, her hair pinned up in a messy bun. In her dark eyes lived the weariness of someone who had loved without being loved in return and waited too long to come. Home, she carried no luggage. Only a letter, folded in 4, written weeks ago by Thomas, and a name that hurt to say, Ellie. The square was nearly empty. An old woman watered her geraniums. A group of children played marbles, but Grace Hamilton didn't stop. She walked straight down the dusty path toward the old farmhouse. And there, beneath the jacaranda tree she had helped plant when she was young, she saw Shadow. The dog didn't move when he saw her. He only lifted his head with the weary look of someone who's seen more than they should. His ears were weathered by the sun, and the scars from old battles still showed beneath his cinnamon-colored fur. "Hello, old friend," Grace Hamilton whispered. Shadow blinked, as if recognizing a voice he hadn't heard in a long time. The front gate hung crooked. Silence weighed in the air, too heavy for a house that was once full of laughter. From inside came a murmur, muffled voices, a thud, the metallic clatter of a fallen bucket. Shadow stood stiff, then walked toward the back door. He looked at Grace Hamilton, as if asking her to follow. She did, wordlessly. Ellie was in the yard, kneeling beside a pile of wet laundry. Her hands were trembling. Her dress was stained with mud, and her knuckles were raw. Ben Whitaker, the younger one, watched from the window, hidden behind a curtain. His eyes were wide, but dim. "Ellie ... Grace Hamilton whispered, barely audible. The girl didn't respond. Didn't even look up. Who the hell let her in? Loren's voice cut the air like a whip. She stood behind them, arms crossed, her mouth curled in contempt. "We don't need visitors here. Especially not ones looking to stir the pot." Grace Hamilton turned slowly, looked her dead in the eyes, unblinking. "I came to see my children." "Your children," Lorraine laughed dry and bitter, like broken glass in her throat. "Now you remember they exist?" "I never forgot them," Grace Hamilton said, her voice soft yet it cracked through the moment like a fault in the wall. An uncomfortable silence fell. Shadow stepped between the two women. He didn't growl, didn't bark. He just stood there, as if he knew the moment needed a presence that wouldn't bend. Lorraine clicked her tongue in disgust. "This isn't your house. Not your family, not your place." Grace Hamilton crouched beside Ellie, not touching her, but close enough for the warmth of her presence to say what words could not. "Sometimes to heal, you don't have to return to the place, but to the heart," she murmured. And for the first time, Ellie's eyes trembled. "Clean her up, Ben Whitaker." Lorraine barked from the doorway. "And you, Ellie, finish hanging the laundry or there's no dinner tonight." The boy moved away from the window. Ellie resumed her task like a wind-up doll. Grace Hamilton didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't beg. She simply rose with the dignity of someone who's learned that love doesn't always need to make noise. "I'll let you put on your little show," Lorraine sneered, turning her back. "But if you dare take anything that isn't yours, I won't hesitate to call the police." Shadow followed her with his eyes until she vanished down the hallway. Later, when the sun leaned low, Grace Hamilton returned to the farm. This time through the service door. She carried a basket of bread, fresh cheese, and a notebook with a blue cover. Ben Whitaker saw her first. He was sitting in the kitchen, a glass of water in his hands. "Do you like to draw?" Grace Hamilton asked, showing him the notebook. He hesitated, then nodded just barely. "Then this is for you, but promise me one thing. Draw what you can't say." Ben Whitaker reached for it, shyly. Shadow sat beside him. For the first time in weeks, Ben Whitaker scratched him behind the ears. That night, while Lorraine slept, Grace Hamilton sat beneath the jacaranda. Shadow at her side, the moon barely brushed the leaves. Ellie came out barefoot, a blanket over her shoulders. "Why did you come back?" she asked, not looking at her. "Because some wounds don't know how to close on their own." "He loved you," the girl said. "But you left." "Sometimes loved isn't enough. And sometimes we make mistakes too." Ellie sat down beside her. She didn't say another word. She just rested her head on Grace Hamilton's shoulder. Shadow let out a long sigh and lay at their feet. It was as if, at last, someone had understood without needing an explanation. The stars shone like old pins in the sky above Willow Hollow. And even though the scars were still there, that night, for the first time, they didn't hurt as much. In the old adobe house, where the beams creaked under the weight of the years and the smell of chicken still clung to the walls, Grace Hamilton returned in silence. She didn't ring the rusted bell at the entrance. She simply pushed the wooden door open with the flat of her hand, like someone afraid the past might still ache if she dared to call it by name. Shadow saw her first. The old dog stood slowly, as if every bone in his body remembered a different chase. He didn't bark. He just walked toward her, ears down, and rested his head against her leg, right where the linen skirt left room for. "Touch. You don't need to say anything," Grace Hamilton whispered, eyes glistening. "You feel it too, don't you?" Shadow's silence spoke louder than any testimony. Sheriff Walt Kinney, the oldest man in the village, opened the door with a look caught between astonishment and guilt. "You again, Grace Hamilton?" "I never left," she replied. "I was just waiting for someone to scream louder than the fear. And this time, she didn't come alone. She brought papers, photographs, printed testimonies. But more than anything, she carried something people had forgotten they could still have: faith that the truth still mattered." Miss Carol Lee, the retired schoolteacher, hugged her tightly when they met in the plaza. "I thought you didn't want anything to do with this place anymore. I didn't. Until I saw Ellie lower her gaze like every step was an apology." In Aunt Natcha's kitchen, with warm cornbread and pot-brewed coffee, the plan took shape. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was justice, whispered gently. "They're not going to talk," said Grace Hamilton, staring into the cup in her hands. "Not yet, but Shadow, he never leaves their side. He sleeps outside the children's door like he's still part of the canine unit. He's more loyal than most men," murmured Dr. Annabelle, wiping her glasses. "Some wounds don't show on the skin." "Then we'll start with the ones that do," said Carol Lee, "with what we can see." And so the alliance began. A teacher with notebooks, a doctor with records, an old man with memory, a woman with courage, and a dog that never stopped standing guard. The first change was small. Ellie left a sheet of paper on Carol Lee's desk. It was a drawing, a chicken coop, a tree, a black dog. And in the corner, in trembling letters, "He doesn't leave me alone." Carol Lee tucked the paper into her bag like it was a testament. The second sign came on a moonless night. Lorraine was shouting in the kitchen because Ben Whitaker had broken a glass. Shadow stepped between the boy and the belt. He didn't attack. He just growled low, deep, like someone who remembers what it means to protect. Chuck Danner was there. He laughed. "What now?" The dog gives the orders? He knows who's a threat, Ben Whitaker murmured, eyes locked on the floor. Lorraine didn't say a word, but her hand trembled. A week later, Grace Hamilton convinced the young man at the store to copy the security footage. It wasn't legal, but neither was hitting a child and lying about the fracture in his soul. In the video, Ellie could be seen cleaning the chicken coop with bloodied knuckles. No one else. Just her and Shadow lying beside her, as if his mere presence could hold up what childhood no longer could. Grace Hamilton showed the footage to Carol Lee and Annabelle. No one spoke. Only old Sheriff Walt Kinney muttered, "How many children must have cried in that dust without anyone noticing?" When the time came to act, there were no trials, only looks. And a promise. Grace Hamilton placed a small recorder inside the kitchen cabinet. She waited. Then, she left a fake folder. With inheritance documents on the table, Lorraine pounced like a vulture on fresh meat. "With this, everything will be mine, everything. Not even those brats will be able to say anything. I raised them. What's theirs? They owe to me. They owe me everything." Chuck Danner laughed. "And if that whore comes back, we'll send her to hell. Just like we did with the first one." The tape captured every word. Shadow stood in the corner, motionless, but his eyes glowed like embers. That night, Grace Hamilton, Carol Lee, Annabelle, Sheriff Walt Kinney, and Naisha gathered at the old village church. They didn't pray. There was no need. They had reclaimed something sacred, the dignity of protecting the most vulnerable. "Tomorrow, we give everything to the magistrate," Grace Hamilton said. "And the children?" Nasha asked. "Ellie asked me not to hug her yet," Carol Lee replied, "but she let me touch her hair." In the room, as the sky began to open like a fresh wound, Ellie slept with her head resting on Shadow's back. Ben Whitaker whispered in her ear, "Do you think he'll ever leave us?" Shadow perked up his ears. He made no sound. He only snuggled closer. Half asleep, Ellie murmured, "Even if everyone else leaves, he always comes back. He remembers." And in that corner of Willow Hollow, where silence had long been a prison, a truth was finally spoken without fear. And that was enough to begin the healing. The house was as quiet as an abandoned church. Not the silence of rest, but the silence that comes before a storm. The air smelled of dry earth and buried fear. Ellie, shoulders hunched by habit, hid behind the dining room curtain, while Grace Hamilton discreetly placed a small recorder beneath the table right where Lorraine usually set her coffee cup. Shadow, lying at the window's edge, watched. With his gray muzzle and eyes darkened by time, he looked asleep. But he wasn't. He never truly was. Sheriff Walt Kinney, the village elder, once said, "That dog doesn't bark at danger. He tracks it, follows it, and corners it." That afternoon, danger wore cheap perfume and red heels. Lorraine walked in with the careless laughter of someone who believes they've won. Chuck Danner followed, with the loose swagger of a man who's never feared consequences. "Soon it'll all be ours," Lorraine said, pouring herself a coffee, as if serving up glory. "With the old man out of the way and the brats under control, we just need one more signature," Chuck Danner replied, pulling a yellowed envelope from his pocket. "Julian won't come back. And if he does, he won't find anything left to claim." "And the kids?" he asked, not looking at her. She let out a hollow laugh. "Dogs adapt when you take their bone." Ellie swallowed hard. She didn't fully understand the words, but she knew the tone. She'd learned to hear what wasn't said. Grace Hamilton, sitting on the porch, waited. She wasn't trembling, but her hands were cold, like metal buried underground. Miss Carol Lee sat in the car, recorder running in duplicate. Dr. Annabelle had already alerted the Valencia authorities. The plan was in motion, fragile, but it was something. Suddenly, Shadow stood. Without a sound, he headed toward the chicken coop. Ellie saw him through the window and felt a pull in her chest. That movement, that direction. It wasn't random. Uncle Roy said they hide things in the coop, she whispered. What kind of things? Asked Ben Whitaker, just coming in with dirt-stained clothes. Things they don't want anyone to find. The siblings looked at each other. Ellie opened the back door, and Shadow was already waiting. He didn't bark, he just walked. They followed, no questions asked. They knew when Shadow led, you walked in silence. They passed the old well, the lemon trees their mother once loved. The coop looked asleep, chickens pecking aimlessly. But Shadow went straight to the darkest corner, beneath the straw. With her paws, she clawed at the dry ground until something metallic caught the light. A box, rusted, with a broken lock. Inside, documents, forged seals, a USB stick. Ellie held it as if it were a bomb. We have to take it to Grace Hamilton, she said. No, said Ben Whitaker. His voice for the first time was firm. We have to stay. Look them in the eyes when everything falls apart. In the living room, Lorraine kept talking, drunk on her own lies. The people in this town are idiots. The children, easy to manipulate. All that's left is to destroy the original record. And what if that bitch Grace Hamilton suspects? Something? Chuck Danner asked. Let her. No one listened to her 20 years ago. No one will now. Then, the door opened. It wasn't a slam. It was a crack stretching through time. Grace Hamilton walked in first. Then Carol Lee, then Annabelle. Ellie and Ben Whitaker came in last, with Shadow at their side, like a living shadow. What is this? Lorraine choked. Grace Hamilton picked up the recorder from the table. She turned it on. Lorraine and Chuck Danner's words filled the room. Chuck Danner lunged for the door, but Shadow blocked him. He didn't growl. He didn't have to. His body was enough. You can't do this, Lorraine said. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from wounded pride. This isn't about what I can do. It's about what must be done, Grace Hamilton replied. Chuck Danner was handcuffed outside, among scattered chickens and sunlight falling like judgment. Lorraine didn't scream. She just looked at Ellie, as if the girl were to blame for it all. Ellie didn't look away. I saw you, she said. At last, what did you say? I saw you, every time. Every blow, every lie. And I stayed quiet because I was scared. She paused, looked at Shadow. But I'm not alone anymore. That night, Ben Whitaker sat on the porch with Shadow. At his feet, Ellie slept for the first time without fear. Grace Hamilton was writing letters she would never send. Do you think she hates us? Ben Whitaker asked. No, I think she hates herself, Grace Hamilton replied. And Shadow? She smiled. Shadow doesn't hate, he waits. Like the soul of a child who survives. A warm wind stirred the curtains. The chicken coop still stood, the shadows stretched long. And among them, only one kept watch in silence, the one with 4 legs, old scars, and a heart that never stopped. Beating for others, Shadow, the dog who learned to forgive even when no one asked him to. Evening had fallen over Willow Hollow with a thick silence, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Gray clouds hung low, heavy with years of secrets. The trees stood still like statues, silent witnesses to everything denied, hidden. Feared, Ellie held Ben Whitaker's hand tightly. Her fingers, still trembling, found the familiar warmth of Shadow's fur, the old canine dog who remained by her side like a loyal shadow. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. He just stared at the gate of the estate with a stillness that could tear your soul apart. On the other side, Lorraine emerged dressed in white, as if she still believed purity could be faked. Beside her, Chuck Danner's face was tight, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the paranoia of a man who knows the curtain is about to fall. I don't know what all the drama is about, Lorraine muttered, not even glancing at the children. Those brats should be grateful. I didn't let them starve like stray dogs. Ben Whitaker let go of his sister's hand. Shadow took a step forward, as if his body knew before the humans did that a soul was in danger. Chuck Danner noticed and scowled. That damn dog. Always sniffing where it shouldn't, he spat, full of rage. And you, always hiding what you shouldn't, came a voice from behind him. It was Grace Hamilton, dressed in a simplicity more disarming than any uniform. She held a folder in her hand. She didn't speak right away. She walked slowly until she stood face to face with the two traitors. Then, with a firm gesture, she laid the folder on the patio table. Here are the recordings, the forged signatures, the transfers, the threats, the scars on Ellie's back, the words you thought silence could bury. Lorraine laughed dry, soulless. And who's going to believe you? A bitter mistress and a couple of spoiled brats? Grace Hamilton didn't answer. It was Ben Whitaker who spoke, his voice trembling but clear. I peed myself every night because I was scared of your footsteps. But I'm not scared anymore. Shadow taught me how to stand. Chuck Danner tried to move forward, maybe to grab the folder, maybe out of sheer panic. But Shadow stepped in his way. He didn't growl. He just stood there, motionless, his eyes locked like daggers. Chuck Danner stepped back, for the first time, afraid of something he couldn't control. From the dirt road, Thomas, Dr. Annabelle, and a municipal officer were approaching. The father's presence cracked the wall of lies. Julian looked at his children with held-back tears and at Shadow with silent gratitude. I thought I'd left you in a safe home, he said, looking at Lorraine. But a home isn't measured in bricks. It's measured in how children breathe inside it. Lorraine shouted something unintelligible, somewhere between rage and mockery, but no one was listening anymore. The officer cuffed her without ceremony, like someone closing a story that no longer deserved another chapter. Chuck Danner tried to run. Shadow launched, not with fury, but with the precision of one trained to protect. He took him down in an instant with a single move. Then he stayed on top of him, not biting, just still, as if to say, this is where your escape ends. Ellie watched everything without blinking. For a moment, the world felt too big, too loud. But then she felt Shadow's muzzle rest gently on her knee, a soft reminder that fear no longer had a place here. Grace Hamilton knelt before her and said softly, you don't have to say anything today, my girl. But when you're ready, I want you to know your story deserves to be told with dignity, not with shame. Ellie looked at her, and for the first time in months, nodded. She didn't cry. But in her eyes was a timid peace, like the first ray of sun after a long, merciless storm. Thomas stroked Shadow, his fingers trembling. I never thought a dog would save what I failed to protect. Shadow lifted his head as if he understood. And perhaps she understood. The officer led Lorraine and Chuck Danner to the vehicle. One by one, the neighbors began peeking out from their homes. There were no shouts, no gossip, only silence. The kind of silence that falls when a very old truth is finally spoken aloud. Ellie approached the table where the documents still lay. She ran her fingers over the photographs, over the written words. Then she left them there. She didn't need proof. She had her back. She had her voice. She had Shadow. And as the sun began to break through the clouds, Ellie bent down and hugged the dog with both arms, burying her face in his gray neck. Thank you for staying. Even when everyone else left, Shadow wagged his tail just once. Then he closed his eyes. It was the first time in a long while that the afternoon didn't hurt. The sky over Willow Hollow woke warm, as if the sun didn't quite want to rise. Low clouds crawled over the already harvested cornfield, revealing the gray walls of the old Ortega house. There, under the eaves of weathered tiles, Ellie sat every morning with a cup of atoll in her hands, watching Shadow, now slower, whiter around the muzzle, lie down at her feet with a deep sigh. The days didn't hurt so much anymore. Grace Hamilton had done what many thought impossible. She rebuilt not only a house, but a family. Julian, now with hands marked more by years than by labor, smiled genuinely. Ben Whitaker spoke more. He slept without flinching. And Ellie? Well, Ellie still had her silences, but she no longer feared them. She had learned to live inside them. One afternoon, while hanging sheets in the yard, Grace Hamilton said to Ellie in a soft voice, like someone singing a secret, "Sometimes healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without it hurting so much." Ellie didn't answer. She just looked down at Shadow, dozing nearby, his ears still alert, though his body was asking for a truce. The house, though restored, still held its old cracks. Some doors still creaked like whispers from the past. And on one of those moonless nights, Ellie dared to enter alone the old room where Lorraine used to lock her in. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She turned on the flashlight, looked at the marks on the wall, the small dried bloodstain in the corner of the frame. Shadow followed her, silent. He sat in front of her, lifted his head, and let out a small whimper. Ellie knelt and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Thank you for never leaving me, not even once." A week later, Dr. Annabelle visited for a final evaluation. She said the children were better, that Ben Whitaker no longer showed signs of severe anxiety, that Ellie had remarkable inner resources for her age. But what moved her most was watching Shadow follow Ellie everywhere, as if his soul were tethered to hers. In the kitchen, Grace Hamilton was making sweet bread. "And you, Julian?" the doctor asked. "Are you healing too?" Julian dried, his hands on the apron, and answered, looking out at the yard, "I'm learning to be a father ... again. Without fear, without guilt." On a morning like any other, while the town celebrated All Saints' Day, a letter arrived. Lorraine had written from prison. Ellie received it with cold hands. Ben Whitaker didn't want to see it. The letter didn't ask for forgiveness. It held no regret, only reproach. Words dry as buried bones. "I was your mother out of obligation. No one taught me how to love. No one ever held me either. Don't expect understanding from someone who only ever knew punishment." Ellie folded the letter in silence. She walked to the fire pit where Julian burned dry leaves and tossed it in. Shadow watched her with that quiet sorrow only animals who've seen too much darkness can carry. "I don't hate her," Ellie said, not to the dog but to herself. "But I won't carry her anymore. That's over." Days later, Ellie and Ben Whitaker took Shadow to the vet. His joints were giving him trouble. "It's his age," the doctor said. "But his heart is strong. Very strong." On the way home, Ben Whitaker, who almost never spoke of what had happened, whispered from the back seat, "Do you think Shadow remembers everything?" Ellie looked at him through the rearview mirror. "Yes, but he doesn't hold a grudge. He just protected us, always." That night, Ben Whitaker drew something. A house with a big tree, 2 children, a woman in an apron, and in the center, a dog with wide eyes and a body marked by scars. He taped it to the wall of his room, right next to the window. When Grace Hamilton saw it, she cried silently. Julian held her. "What do you see?" he asked. "The life we didn't have ... but managed to save in time." One Sunday afternoon in the town square, the mayor presented Shadow with an honorary medal. The community of Willow Hollow thanks this silent hero for protecting those who couldn't speak. Ellie stepped onto the stage. She took the microphone with trembling hands but a steady voice. He didn't bark when it hurt the most. He didn't bite. He didn't run. He just stayed. And sometimes, that's the only thing that saves a life. Not leaving. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was warm. Sustained. Like real affection. Like forgiveness. That night, Ellie sat by Shadow's bed. The dog slept deeply. She stroked his head, whispering as if telling a bedtime story. "If one day you go, you won't go alone. You'll take every tear we never got to cry, but also every laugh we learned because of you." Shadow didn't answer. He just wagged his tail slowly like a page being turned. And Ellie, for the first time, closed her eyes and slept without nightmares. Because while the past can't be erased, it is possible to write a different ending. One where the monsters have no power, where children laugh out loud, and where dogs stay. Always. Willow Hollow woke up to a gentle mist that morning, as if the world had decided to speak in whispers. In the old adobe house, Grace Hamilton served cinnamon coffee without a word. Ellie, now 16, sat by the window. She didn't speak either. She just reached out and ran her hand over Shadow's gray back, now thinner, his muzzle dusted with white. The dog didn't move. He simply closed his eyes, as if he understood that the gesture said everything. Outside, Ben Whitaker was mending the fence with Thomas. The silence between them wasn't distant, it was comfortable, full of things that had already been said on harder days. Since Loren's trial, words had stopped being necessary. What mattered no longer had to be shouted. Ellie held a notebook in her hands, the same one where, as a little girl, she'd once written with a trembling hand, "If I'm not here tomorrow, someone should know." Today, in that same notebook, she wrote slowly, "Shadow saved us, not from her, not from fear. He saved us from forgetting we were still children." When she looked up, the dog was watching her, not with sadness, but with that sweet gravity of those who have seen too much and yet choose to stay. "You'd stay even if the world split in two," Ellie whispered. Shadow tilted his head. Then he curled up beneath the chair, as if he knew. The day would be long. Loren was transferred that afternoon. The sentence was final: child abuse, document fraud, aggravated coercion. But the town didn't need the legal terms. It was enough for them to remember the screams, the bruises, the stale stench of fear that clung to the air whenever she passed by. "They're all ungrateful bastards," she spat as she climbed into the Guardia Civil truck. "If it weren't for me, those brats would have starved to death. That bitch Grace Hamilton, she's not even a mother." Thomas didn't reply. Neither did Grace Hamilton, nor Ben Whitaker. But Ellie stepped forward, calm voice, stone eyes. "You didn't give us hunger. You gave us silence. And that was more poisonous than hunger." The door slammed shut. Lorraine was swallowed by the dust of the road. At the old cemetery, Grace Hamilton and the children placed flowers where Ellie and Ben Whitaker's mother rested. There was no fancy headstone, just a rusted iron cross and a pot with dried bougainvillea. "I didn't know how to protect them," Thomas said softly. "Not her. Not you." "It's not too late," Grace Hamilton whispered, taking his hand. Shadow lay at the foot of the grave. He was tired, his movements slower now. Sometimes he stared into the horizon for long minutes, as if searching for something no one else could see. That night, Ellie rose in silence. She entered Shadow's room and lay beside him on the carpet. She spoke to him in a low voice, like when she was 6. "You never left me, not once. When Ben Whitaker almost died, it was you who found him. When I wanted to die, it was you who laid your head on my lap and brought me back. If you leave, how do I learn to breathe again?" Shadow lifted his head, rested his muzzle on Ellie's chest. She held him. They fell asleep like that. Shadow died a week later, in peace. At home, in the shadow of the old vine where he used to wait for the children after school. Thomas dug the grave with his own hands. Ben Whitaker filled it with damp earth. Grace Hamilton placed a laminated photo, Shadow in his youth, in uniform, beside his first officer. And at the base, a note written by Ellie. "He didn't bark when it hurt, he just stayed. And that saved us." The town began to change after that. Grace Hamilton opened a small support center for traumatized children. She named it the House of Silence in honor of the place where Ellie had learned to write her truths without noise. Ellie published her first book a year later. It wasn't a novel, it was a memoir. Its title, The Dog Who Guarded the Silence. On the final page, there was a dedication to all the girls who learned not to breathe too loudly, and to the dog who reminded them how. One day, an older woman walked into the bookstore. Her face was wrinkled, and her eyes carried the weight of someone who had waited a long time to say something. She bought the book, sat on a park bench, read it all without lifting her eyes. She cried silently. In the end, she handed it to her granddaughter. "Read it," she said. "It's not just the story of a girl and her dog. It's the story of when the world feels cruel, but sometimes even a dog chooses not to leave." The girl took the book in both hands, held it like it was burning. "And at the end?" she asked. "Does everything get better?" The grandmother smiled. The kind of smile only survivors know how to give. Not everything, but enough to breathe again.